All right. Welcome to whoever is out there with us right now. We're going to get started here in about 3 minutes or so. But if you're listening right now, if you've joined us, let us know where you're coming from. Let us know where you're located. We're really excited to have you. We'll be quiet here for a minute or two before we get formally started. We got a couple minutes before this starts, but just figured we'd jump on so everybody knows we're here. And as I mentioned before, let us know where you're coming from in the world. And if you want to let us know one thing you're most excited about for today, go ahead and do that. All right. For whoever's out there, we're going to get started here in just a minute or two. You know, some of you may be on YouTube, some may be out there in LinkedIn. In a minute here, I'll kick off our 30-second countdown video. If anyone's seen some of my webinars, they've probably been tortured by it before, but you'll get tortured by it one more time before I introduce Justin here and we jump into some really exciting questions in the world of AI and planning. All right. Again, if you're out there, if you've joined us a little early, let us know where you're coming from. I'll ask that question again here once we actually get started. But I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here with our countdown. All righty. Well, welcome for those of you that are out there on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever you may be joining us from. If you're out there, please let us know in the comments where you're coming from. We'd love this to be interactive, so feel free to put a comment out there and let us know where you're at the moment. I want to start here by introducing my guest. I have here with me Justin Croft, who is the VP of Solution Architect at Qubit. And I'll give him the opportunity to spend a minute and introduce himself to us.
Yeah, Paul. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. As you said, I'm the leader of solution architecture at Qubit. That means I spend a lot of time doing designing and requirements gathering of solutions that we implement for our clients in the planning and AI space. My background is FP&A. I spent more than a decade in corporate financial planning and analysis, doing a variety of different funding, predictive models, planning, you name it, we did it. And really kind of that drove me towards data science because I felt like there was more to see, more to analyze, more to find. And now I've got the real joy of being able to put those two things together. FP&A and finance and artificial intelligence. So glad to be here.
Great. We're really excited to have you. Appreciate you sharing that. And I do know we have some people out there on LinkedIn. Just know we're dealing with a little bit of a delay. So hopefully your comments will come here in a moment, but don't be afraid to ask questions. Just know we have a little bit of a delay in the feed that happens from time to time on LinkedIn. So I know I looked at my phone and I could see some people out there and see that they've commented, but it hasn't come through to StreamYard. So just be aware they will come through. Hopefully that lag will shorten up a little bit, but it may take us a minute to get back to you because it doesn't always, unfortunately, not everything's real time like we think, right? Why hasn't AI solved this, Justin? He's like,
didn't do everything yet.
Dang it. All right. Well, let's jump in. The first question I'd like to ask you when it comes to AI and everything we're seeing, how are you seeing companies use AI in planning today? Let's start with that. What's the kind of the main use cases you're seeing?
The main focus, and has been for a number of years, is really the idea of what I call traditional time series forecasting, analyzing a historical set of time series points. And that might be sales, it might be revenue, it might be units, it might be dollars, but really taking that historical trend and using AI to identify patterns and to forecast that into the future. And once you've got that technology linked up and that business process built, incorporating that into your planning function is really pretty straightforward. So I'd say that's really where most companies start and get the most value, at least right now.
Okay. So I'm curious, obviously, unless you've lived under a rock for the last 18 months, you've seen the rise of AI and in particularly generative AI, right? And so I'm curious, how has that changed things? Are you getting a lot of questions from companies? Are you seeing implementation around generative AI in planning? Or is it still really more around, right, using those statistical models, algorithms, those type of things? So maybe address that a little bit, because I think everybody's curious to see how that's going to change things.
Yeah, well, first, everybody talks about it and everybody's interested in understanding more about it. Clearly, Gen AI has the power to be transformative across culture and across business, but specifically within the Office of Finance and FP&A, I think the use cases are really still being defined. It's pretty clear how to apply traditional statistical modeling to your data to get an outcome. What's less clear is how to apply Gen AI to your data in a way that's going to produce an outcome that you can depend on, that's reliable, that's repeatable, that's auditable. So everybody wants to talk about it, but nobody's doing it yet in the Office of Finance, in short. But I do see a lot of potential. One customer in particular is interested in using it for financial statement analysis.
Mm-hmm.
They've got about 1,200 stores, and they produce a P&L for each store. And they want to add some verbal commentary and analysis to each one of those P&Ls. Clearly, a team of analysts can't do that 1,200 times, but generative AI could be the solution. So I think that's a great example of ways that we're exploring how to use generative AI and tools like that to augment what FP&A teams are doing today.
Agreed. I think that's a great way. Also, if you're wanting that natural language and ask it a question that's stored in a database and get a return, that's great. Some use cases I've seen, kind of like you mentioned, if I need to benchmark some public companies, right? Maybe I work for a company and we want to go public in the next couple of years, and I got to put together a report of our main competitors, and they're all public. AI can do a great job of summarizing that and giving me some information. It's not going to do it all for me. I always like to say generative AI is like your intern. You wouldn't take the intern's work and give it to your boss, nor should you do the same with generative AI. But I think where you want summary of content, it's great. I think there's some data applications we're still figuring out. And when it comes to how it helps with statistical modeling and the machine learning and algorithms, there are other areas in AI that are just better. Will we figure out how to incorporate that together? Sure. But right now, that's not really the strength of an LLM, so to speak.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm watching the space very closely to see how LLMs get applied to time series modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And there's contenders out there, and there's models being built and trained to do that. Particularly in the idea of zero shot learning or single shot learning, where a large language model can produce a time series forecast on very little historical data. I think that's really interesting. But it's not there yet. We really haven't seen anything that we feel comfortable deploying for our clients.
Yeah, you don't feel like it's at that deployable level. I'm curious, is there any one in particular seeing out there that kind of has you excited, or is it mostly within existing tools? Or are you seeing some new companies that are really kind of honing in and trying to figure out how we do that? Just kind of, and I know you may not be able to share all of that, but just kind of curious a little bit.
Well, most of our generative AI right now is with the What's Next platform from IBM.
Sure.
Because that integrates with a lot of the other tools that we use, and it's easy for clients to transition into that. So that's where we spend a lot of our focus.
And that makes a lot of sense. I know Watson's an extremely powerful tool.
It is. It is. And, uh, our consultants love the way that it incorporates multiple different models from different open source vendors, so that you've got lots of different options, models to test and try.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're doing any kind of statistical modeling, it's about finding what's the best fit for your data. At least that's how I think about it. And rarely do you just pick one model and everything's great.
The best fit that you can explain, Paul, I think
Well,
is maybe the way to talk about it.
talk a little bit about that. What do you mean when you say the best fit that you can explain in AI? Because sometimes we look at it and go, oh, that's really close. I should use that. You're saying, hold on. You need to look at some other stuff. So elaborate on that.
Stuff. Yeah, you need to be able to explain why is a model accurate or not accurate. And sometimes it's a function of the data that you're providing. And there's just simply not enough signal or no signal in the historical data that you're providing. With a purely statistical approach, you're able to deconstruct the algorithm and say, here's what it's doing. You've got an exponential smoothing model. Here are the inputs. Here are the parameters. This is what each of the parameters is doing. So that's easy to explain and relatively easy for people to understand once you kind of take it apart. Where it gets more complex is in the neural networks and deep learning models, things like Profit from Facebook, from Meta, which do a phenomenal job of detecting seasonality, creating forecasts, but it's more difficult to explain. Here's what's happening under the cover. They're more of a black box, and so you have to take what comes out of it with a grain of salt in terms of being able to explain it and validate it.
That leads me to a question. The term black box, I think it's something finance in particular fears, right? There's a reason all of us like the spreadsheet. Even if it's a mess, you can still at least untangle it or start over. We've done both.
Yep.
Whereas sometimes you see a number and you're like, okay, that number makes sense. It seems right, but you just don't feel like you understand the mechanics. How do you think about that with the rise of AI, right? Because if you look at generative AI, very few people really understand what's going on in the background. It's just returning an answer. And often that's even the case with some of these models. So how do you balance that and get comfortable with the fact that as technology plays a bigger and bigger role, there's going to be more real concerns and situations where it's going to feel like a black box to many people. Doesn't mean it can't be explained, but maybe we just don't have the experience or we don't understand it well enough. So how do you balance that?
Yeah.
Coming.
I think a lot of that has to do with the business process that you wrap around the predictive capabilities. We really approach it as statistical modeling. AI provides a foundational forecast, right? So this is your baseline, and then on top of that, you've got a human who comes behind and layers in adjustments and overrides. There are always going to be things that the model doesn't know about or doesn't understand, particularly when you're looking at things like new products, product line extensions, geographic expansion, pricing and promotion changes. Those are all examples where you really need a human to augment whatever the model is putting out, just because the model doesn't have enough context. And so like I said, we think about it as layers of a cake, where the vast majority of the work is being done by the baseline statistical forecast. And then the other 10%, let's say, of the work is being done by the analysts who come behind and layer in those adjustments and overrides. So within that controlled business process, I think it's easier to say, well, this number makes sense, this number doesn't make sense, I'm going to adjust this number. Maybe the model doesn't appreciate all these other factors we have.
Makes a lot of sense. I had kind of, as I think about that and I hear you say the adjusting and thinking about things, I had a behavioral economist on one of my podcasts, and she talked a lot about how it's technology and people. You got to be able to have that validation, at least someone look at it, because there's always subjectivity, because we're predicting forward. Yes, historical is accurate, hopefully.
Hopefully.
But you know what I mean? It's historical. It's happened. It's taken place. when you're predicting forward, nobody's certain what's going to happen. And so there's always going to be that judgment. And I think that will always be the case no matter how good AI gets, is there's still that element of judgment in this whole process.
Mhm. And when we have clients who get concerned about that, that's when I really pivot towards the idea of scenarios to say, this is what we think is going to happen under this set of assumptions. We can make changes to those assumptions, and you're going to get maybe a slightly different forecast or a dramatically different forecast. But this is one potential version of the future among many. So let's talk about what really drives your business and what levers we want to pull within the forecasting process to come up with a final set of numbers.
Yeah, I do like that. And so, we've been talking about the planning, some different models, how to think of generative AI and, where you're seeing some use cases. What I'd be curious is we have some people out there. And before I finish asking this question, I just want to let everybody know I'm keeping an eye on LinkedIn to see if you have any comments. For whatever reason, StreamYard's comments are not showing up on our end today, which is the platform we use to integrate with LinkedIn. So I just want everybody to know that. I know we've had a few people join from India and there's people out there. And so we're just managing that as best we can. It's the joy of technology. So we're not ignoring you if you put comments. I'm trying to keep an eye on it, but it's kind of hard to manage 3 different things. But I'll do my best here. So with that said, I'll get back to my question, but just want everybody to know who's out there and listening. We're dealing with that and a little bit of a lag. But how should people think about AI if they want to get started with their forecasting? Right? Sometimes it could just be overwhelming. You're like, all right, I know this technology could help me, but I just like my Excel. It works and I'm happy. But I know I probably should be doing something. So how do you get started? How do you think about that? And what do you tell your clients?
Yeah. Well, to build on something I mentioned earlier, right? When I was in FP&A, I was looking at rows and columns in a spreadsheet, trying to come up with a forecast, and I always felt like there was another dimension I was missing. There was another set of relationships and patterns within the data that I was really missing, and that drove me to leave FP&A and explore the whole data science side of the business. And now I'm able to kind of combine those 2 interests productively. But I think there's this idea of really wanting to analyze your data and find patterns in a way and at a scale that a traditional spreadsheet-based approach can't do. So that's the first thing, is you've really got to have a business problem that requires that level of rigor and cost and expense and overhead of bringing predictive to the problem, right? Lots of companies are fine in Excel. Our clients typically are dealing with what we talk about as multidimensional problems. They've got multiple departments, multiple locations, thousands of products, or tens or hundreds of thousands of products that they want to analyze and forecast. And you can't do that in a spreadsheet. The most I've seen a company do is about 10,000 products in a spreadsheet, and they were pulling their hair out.
No thanks.
Yeah. So taking that multidimensional problem out of a spreadsheet, right? That's another area that you really need to look for. That's a signal where you need to migrate towards another tool. And generative AI can help you get started, right? If you go to any of the generative AI platforms and ask it to write Python code for you to come up with a forecast, it's going to do a great job. And then you can take that Python code and just use that as your first entryway into a statistical forecasting and AI forecasting model. So the barriers from a technical standpoint, odd as it sounds with all of the hype out there, the technical barriers are really lower than they ever have been before. It's easier to get started with this than it ever has been. You just need to look at your business problem, look at your data, make sure it's right to apply AI. Does it make sense? Is it worth it? Right? Is the juice worth the squeeze? People say. And then find the technology that makes the most sense for you and start to apply it within a planning process.
I liked a couple things you said there, right? Is the juice worth the squeeze? That's something everybody has to think about. If you have very little data, really messy data, is that the best use of your time to try to, figure out how to use it. I also really appreciate that generative AI, although you can't just feed it your data yet and always expect it to output something. One, most of them are public, so don't feed it your data. Two, as you mentioned, a lot of approaches we could take is, hey, I want to try to statistically model this. Here's what I know about my data. Could you write a script in Python that would help me get started? And you could continue to ask it. You could ask it, okay, what's it doing, to give you explanations. I think the thing to remember as you're getting started is generative AI isn't something where you just ask it a question and move on. You got to continue to prompt and push it. And you also have to, kind of be able to monitor it and make sure it all makes sense. But I really like how you said there's ways the barriers to entry are lower. Like, you don't have to know Python at the same level to do some basic things today as you used to.
You don't. You don't. Now, that said, the mistake that I see people making is to start with the technology. You really need to start with the business problem and focus on what it is that you're trying to solve. Within planning, it's a little easier because it's pretty clear you're trying to take historical data, historical numbers, and come up with a forecast along the same set of dimensions. But do you need to incorporate external predictors? Do you need to adjust for outliers? Do you need to cleanse your historical data? Bad historical data is something that we deal with every day in the time period post-COVID, right? There are a lot of companies that we work with who used to have 5, 6, 7 years worth of data, and now they have 2. So how do they adjust for that?
Well, and then you talk about, even if you have good data, do you really want to use a COVID year as your baseline?
Right.
Right. You either got to make a lot of adjustments or assumptions, or because past is not necessarily a predictor of future. Sure, can it help you? But there are times when it's probably a poor predictor of the future. Not times that it's probably, there are times that it is. Let's be honest.
It is. Yeah, just to build on something you said, do you have enough historical data? We've got customers with years and years worth of historical data. We've got customers with weeks of historical data. So you really want to be in a sweet spot there, where you've got enough historical data to make it worth your effort.
Sure. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. So, one thing I want to ask, when you and I chatted before we, jumped on this conversation, you had mentioned something that I thought was interesting and really stuck with me. You had mentioned that when you're incorporating AI in your planning process and within your finance department, within FP&A, don't think of it as just a project. Think of it as a program. Can you elaborate on that? What did you mean by that? And what's the danger of thinking of it as a project?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really like this concept, and a project to me has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Maybe you're excuse me. Maybe you're implementing a system or doing some sort of integration, and it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And at some point, you're done, right? And everything just works, and you can go on about your life.
Yep. Building a house.
Yeah, absolutely. A program requires ongoing care and feeding to be effective and to be trusted. And I really say all predictive should be approached as a program, particularly within the Office of Finance, because you're never done. There's always more that you could do, and there's always more that you have to do in terms of understanding and explaining the model and creating the next forecast and the next forecast. So models have to be cared for and fed. They have to be reevaluated periodically, particularly if you're incorporating external data. That has to be evaluated and reevaluated for its relevancy and additional input and accuracy in your models and in your process. So you really need to think of this as a program, and it's part of what you do on an ongoing basis, right? It becomes part of your planning process.
I like how you said that, and that makes sense to me. So I'm curious, obviously you went from FP&A to the data science side to the consultant where you're helping companies get better at FP&A, incorporate the data and move beyond, just Excel, as I like to say. Not that you can't do statistical modeling in Excel, but we have planning tools for a reason and we continue to grow and scale.
Right.
And so I would love to know, maybe one or two real success stories you've seen of companies using AI in their planning. Could you share, some examples where you've seen it make a big difference for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So several come to mind. One was a household name baked goods company that came to us needing some help, and this was during the pandemic, needing some help forecasting out their future sales and really planning out their business. And they came to us with some preconceived notions about the data that really drove their business. They thought that certain data elements, things like the number of miles driven, the price of gas, how mobile people were, that really drove their business and was related to the sales of their products. And we said, great, let's look at that and do a deeper dive. And what we found was these historical data points, these levers that they really managed their business by, were not at all related to sales of the products. And so we had to kind of kill a sacred cow, so to speak, in some sense there, because people were very protective of this idea. And so we had to introduce some new predictors, some new external data that did have relationships to sales and to products, and replace what they had traditionally used as drivers of their business. When we did that, we not only got a forecast, we got a much more accurate forecast, one that they could really depend on, and one that they could understand and drive their business. What we found was distribution channels, and in particular Walmart and large box retailers, that really drove their business. And it wasn't sales in convenience stores and miles driven and the price of gas. Consumer behavior had shifted. And part of that was the pandemic, but part of it was just simply time and the evolution of culture. So I think that was a real success because we were able to not just say, hey, this doesn't work, but hey, let's look at this slice of data and let's manage your business this way. So that was a lot of fun to do, a lot of fun to work on.
I bet, to be able to help them completely change the way they think about things, what inputs go into it to have a better output. That's what we all want. So I appreciate you sharing that one. There's a question that I wanted to ask you as we've been talking that I've been thinking about in your journey. We have a lot of people now, and I get asked this question from time to time. Hey, do I need to get a data science degree in FP&A? And with all the changes that are rapidly going on, what would you advise people? How do you think of that balance of how much you need to know the data and the data science and modeling as we move forward and we see more AI, more statistical, more predictive type of stuff? What do you tell people, or how do we think about that in your view?
Well, my answer is somewhat biased because it's kind of reflective of where I came from.
Sure.
But
we're all biased. That's okay.
Yeah.
We'll take it nonetheless.
What's not going to go out of style is really understanding your business. Technologies change. Gen AI may sweep away statistical modeling. Who knows? But what's really never going to go out of style is understanding your business and the way that your organization works and how you make money. And if you understand that, you can apply whatever tool or process is relevant at the time and be successful. So I'd say focus on the business first. Focus on the business fundamentals. Understand how your company competes and how you make money and how you lose money. Know what those external predictors are. What are those levers that really drive your business out there in the marketplace? And then you can apply technology to a planning process.
I absolutely love that answer, because the thing I tell people so often, whether it's applying technology, whether it's applying finance, Start by learning your business, understand the operations, understand the flow of a dollar.
Yeah.
From how does it flow through the entire process, both for expenses and for different costs. If you understand the flow, you will be so much more helpful in meetings and you understand the operations and a little bit of strategy than just being able to go, well, our margin's 36% and we'd like it to be better. Okay, well, that's nice. Well, how do we do that? Well, we know that our biggest cost is X, and we know there's been a lot of competition in the marketplace. Can we get a better price from a dealer? And being able to actually have that, we know that so-and-so has come into this space. And the more you know where you can contribute to those conversations and help drive the business forward. Because, right, planning at the end of the day is all about trying to help a company achieve its strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, things like understanding um, maybe even the way that your products mix changes over time.
Mhm.
Right? If you just focus at the top level, revenue may look great, but maybe your products are being sold in low margin channels at a higher rate than they used to be. So understanding those sorts of dynamics and that multidimensional aspect that I spoke about earlier is really important as you transition to more advanced types of models.
Well, great. We're gonna wrap up here in a minute. I'd normally do a few minutes of Q&A, but for whatever reason, comments are not coming through on our end today. You're welcome to try to throw in a comment, but we haven't got one yet. And I know a few people have put them out there. We had a few people tell us they were from India and things. So we'll hang on here for a minute or two, see if any comments come through. We'll address those. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and wrap here. So I'll give you a last word, Justin. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
Absolutely. I would just really encourage everyone to explore how to apply AI within a planning process. As I said earlier, the technology, the barriers to entry are lower than they've ever have been before. So this is something that you can explore and implement fairly quickly with fairly low risk. It's achievable, it's attainable, and it can really add value and add efficiency to your processes. So get started. There's no reason not to be doing this.
I think that's great advice is get started, figure it out, improve your process. There's a graph I love to share that shows companies that are using the cloud and AI to ML in their forecasting, the business is much happier with their forecast.
Absolutely.
And that's usually a sign of other things as well, that they're really thinking, how can I use technology? It's not just that, but in general rule, it's a lot better. So I think those are great parting words, and we'll just hang on here for about another minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and close the session. But thank you, everybody who's joined us. Justin, thank you so much for taking 30 minutes and chatting with the audience. I know I learned a few things and really enjoyed talking about it because I'm excited for the future. It's going to get better.
Well, thank you for having me, Paul. This was a lot of fun.
All right, great. Well, we're going to go ahead and end the stream there. But if anyone has a question that they're dying to ask and they didn't get it, you can always email me. I'll send it over to Justin. We'll get you back an answer on that. So thanks.